There are apparently more than 100 different Newcastles around the globe, and I already have two favourites. And they're the two ones called Newcastle that had trams. And both of them closed their tram networks coincidentally in 1950. But only one of them has seen trams, or dare I say it, viewers, light rail return to the city. And we're going to look at that one, and that is Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. And we'll have to look at trams in Newcastle, England another time. Australia's Newcastle is the second most populated city of New South Wales, Australia. And in this video, we'll look at the rise of its steam trams, then electric trams, its demise, and then a bit on its return. I'm Marty, and welcome to BackTracks. Newcastle's tram network operated from 1887 to 1950. From the start till 1923, it was exclusively a steam-driven network, and then the first lines of the system were converted to electric operations in 1923, and by 7 years later, in 1930, it was exclusively electric, and trams continued to run right up until 1950. The 10 Newcastle lines connected the city centre with its suburbs and neighbouring towns, out to Wallsend, Spears Point and West Wallsend. The maximum length of the network was 56 kilometres, and in 1918 it had its largest steam fleet with 52 motors and 124 trailers. And at the peak of the electric system, in October 1926, there were 9 lines of 38 kilometres operated by 98 trams of the single LP class, which were interestingly rebuilds of old F-class trams originating from Sydney. Now, for most of the life of the system, Newcastle's lines started and finished from Parnell Place, which is right on the coast in East Newcastle. While the steam depot was initially set up on the corner of Hunter and Perkins Streets, a little to the west, in 1893 the terminal was extended east to Parnell Place and a new larger steam tram depot was constructed. And a bit like Fort Macquarie tram depot in Sydney, which is now where the Opera House stands, this is another one of those, why did they build a tram depot in such a prominent and beautiful location? From there, trams swept along the coast to start their run back to the suburbs. And what a spectacular view riders would have had, because they got to look south over Newcastle Ocean Baths, Newcastle Beach and down to Merewether Beach. And past what was then the Newcastle Hospital, which for nearly 190 years was the main hospital of the city. And the hospital stood overlooking the Pacific Ocean from 1817 right up until 2007. Then to get a great view of the ocean, you just needed to get sick, but now you'd have to have millions of dollars to own an apartment there. During the steam era, trams entered the city along Hunter Street and then onto Scott Street, which passed the Newcastle railway station and then up to Parnell Place. But when the electric era started, a single track was constructed through the shopping district in Hunter Street East, passing through what is now the closed-off Pacific Park in front of the former north wing of the hospital. And from what I can tell of pictures, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, that the electric trams returned to the city via Scott, but they generally left the city via Hunter Street East, which is now the Hunter Street Mall. Here are some shots of what it looked like in the 1940s when trams ran in both Hunter Street and in Scott Street. Today the light rail runs nearly along the old steam route, along Hunter Street and then into Scott Street and up to Parnell Place. And just a little bit on the railway station. The railway station actually opened in 1858, replacing a temporary terminus on what later became Civic Station. And the current railway station building was built way back in 1878. We'll leave the city centre now and have a look at some of the key lines of the Newcastle system. We'll start in the north and we'll go anti-clockwise around. We'll first look at the Carrington and Port Waratah lines. Both of these lines were some of the last to enter service, and both were very much linked to Newcastle's main industries of coal and then later steelworks. In fact, Newcastle was known as a steel town, with BHP Steelworks dominating the city, which opened for operation in 1915. The line to Carrington, or originally called Bullock Island, was actually laid in 1905 across the old Throsby Creek Bridge, which took the line directly from Hunter Street across the creek. However, there were disputes about how the line would cross a railway line. Good news, the railway crossing issues were solved by 1912. The line was finally finished, but now branched from the Maryville line at Hannell Street and used the old railway bridge on Cowper Street. Most of the original line was never used and was ripped up. The Carrington Electric line terminated at the end of Burke Street And today, there's nothing to suggest a tram line once existed here. The next line in our journey was originally called the Maryville line, because that's as far as it went when it was built in 1914. But then it was soon extended in December 1916 to Port Waratah to service the newly opened BHP Steelworks. And this extension was the last major construction of the Newcastle system. The BHP Steelworks continued operating right up until 1999, and at one point was one of the largest employers in Australia with a workforce of over 11,000 in 1981. It closed in September 1999, and there's nearly nothing left, except an empty field and a few abandoned buildings. It's a bit of an eerie place today. The Mayfield line opened in 1893, initially to Tyers Hill, but then it was extended along Maitland Road to Hanbury Street, and that opened in 1901. I couldn't actually find too many historical images of the line, but one interesting one was that the hotel continues on the site of the original Waratah Hotel, which you can see in an image from opening day in 1901. This hotel later became the Amos Hotel and is now the Stag and Hunter, and the line closed on the 26th of September 1948. A steam line to Waratah via Broadmeadow opened in 1915 and electric services started in April 1925. Now the cost of the Waratah line included the overhead bridge at Broadmeadow, and at the terminus in Bridge Street was the Rosary Convent Waratah, and that was opened in 1888 under the Dominican Order of Nuns. And some of the main buildings remain there today from the time of tram operations and form now part of the site of the St Catherine's of Siena nursing home. It's time to go west, and the line to the twin towns of Wallsend-Plattsburgh, today basically just called Wallsend. This was the first line to open in 1887, and it was the longest line of the system. The line went via Hamilton, Broadmeadow, Lambton and Jesmond. There was, however, a single track section where the tramway passed underneath the old Lambton Colliery Railway. Following duplication of the line, this single line section was changed to a gauntlet track. That is very hard to say, believe me. Gauntlet tracks are pretty unique. There were once 4, I think, in New South Wales, but none exist today. The other interesting part of the line was how much ran off-street in its own reservation. Most cyclists and pedestrians travelling the path between Crowd Ace and Jesmond Park would probably be unaware that the rock cutting was constructed there in 1886 and 1887 for the tram line. And this rock cutting started at the west end of Howe Street. The line terminated during the electric era in Kemp Street, Danbury Street, near where the old railway goods shed stands today. The terminus was actually across the creek until the bridge became unsafe, and that terminus is now where the car park is of Wallsend Village. Looking at the pictures, the solicitor's office looks like it's on the site of the former commercial hotel, which apparently was affectionately known as the Fig Tree Hotel. What today seems like an unusual extension was that from Wallsend to the distant town of West Wallsend. At 25 kilometres from Newcastle, this was the longest urban tram line in Australia, and a branch from this went to the picnic spot at Spears Point on Lake Macquarie, which opened in January 1912. The Newcastle to West Wallsend line holds the record as the longest urban tram line in Australia, beating Melbourne's Route 75, which is 23 kilometres. Apparently it took an hour and a half to travel the full length of the line. These 2 long lines were not electrified due to the onset of the Depression, and they were both closed in November 1930. Opening in 1900 was the Adamstown line. It started as a 1-mile single track that branched from the Wallsend line at 9 Ways in Broadmeadow and ran along Brunker Road. The steam tram service commenced in August 1900 and the line was electrified in 1925. The line had 3 different termini over its life, originally terminating just outside the public school, but the tram whistle disrupted meetings at the Methodist Now Uniting Church. And as part of the line's duplication in 1927, the terminus was moved to just south of Glebe Road, but there it caused traffic congestion issues. So in 1938, the tram line was extended further south, a couple of 100 metres to a terminus past Victoria. And that was probably the last extension to any government tram line in New South Wales. Heading back towards the coast is the Glebe line, which originally was called the Merewether line. And it changed names when the line to Merewether Beach was completed. It opened in 1894, electrified in 1924, and it was closed in 1950. and the terminus for the Glebe line was the corner of City Road and Alice Street. Again, there's not much here to remind anyone of the tram line once existed. The Merewether Beach line ran from Newcastle to Merewether Beach via Cooks Hill. It opened in 1901, originally proposed to branch off the Glebe line, then called the Merewether line, but eventually it had its own distinct line. It was electrified in 1924 and it closed in 1950. During the steam era, the network was serviced by the Hunter Street and Parnell Place depots. But with electrification approaching, construction of a new depot commenced in 1918 at Hamilton, and it came into use shortly afterwards. And once the conversion to electric was completed in 1927, the Hunter Street and Parnell Place depots were closed and all operations were carried out in the Hamilton depot. I mentioned before that Newcastle, in its electric era, operated 98 of a single class of tram called the LP type, and these were transferred from Sydney throughout the period of electric service. And one interesting feature of the depot is the wall memorial that stood during the tram era and continues to stand there today. It has a model of the front of steam tram motor 54A. The Hamilton depot was converted to a bus depot after the removal of the remaining trams at the closure of the system. And in 1950, a referendum was held to decide whether to keep or scrap the remaining trams. And the result was extremely close, with the choice to close the network winning by just one vote. And so the trams were replaced by buses. The whole system closed on Saturday, the 10th of June 1950. It only took the city about 69 years to work out they may have made a mistake because the trams are back. In 2019, a new light rail or tram system was opened in Newcastle as part of a revitalisation project for the city centre. It has 6 stops and a fleet of 6 trams. And much of the line, nearly all of it, runs along the old railway reservation, but then also along Hunter and Scott Street, where the original trams ran. Well, there you have it. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you're enjoying the videos, and thank you also for all the great chat in the comments. And as always, thank you for all the image and information sources, particularly for this one, the Newcastle Herald, the Living Histories website of Newcastle University, Trolleywire magazine, and photos by Greg and Sylvia Ray. And looking forward to sharing another video with you soon when we take another look at the lost and found public transport of Australia. See you later.